It is now February 20th, because it's late at night, it's midnight. Yes, this is yes, this is a sort of a sequel to the, I was going to do an accent, but why? The sequel to the atheist cult questions story, sort of a sequel. This is Talking Pointless. New episode of Talking Pointless. It's been a long time since we've done one. Since Bill O'Reilly was fired, there was no point in making fun of Talking Pointless. So this is a new one. It's been a long time. We tried a spin-off. That was about in November of 2016. That was going to be on the subject of religion versus atheism, dogma, and all that stuff. The unified theory that has been held since, however, is there was no backlash at all. Yes. But the stories and concepts still rear their head, so to speak, on the subject of all of that, faith and religion and science and stuff. And probably the main reason that the Calcat show does not go full bore into actual theology school or something like that is because although we don't quantify belief, we believe in, some of us believe in the Christianity story, the model, and the idea, and the New Testament. Some of the Old Testament stuff is not really accurate. It just isn't. So that's not a heresy or a blasphemy. It's like that in the many periods in history, they have discarded some elements of the Old Testament. There are some stuff where you have them. You could be stoned to death with rocks for looking the wrong way in a certain town, or you're not supposed to eat certain kinds of food, fish or whatever, shellfish, or you're not supposed to look a certain way or be a certain way because, which is some of that stuff is just ignored. The big show events are different. There are all these different factions, and you wonder why there are different factions. I guess what I'm getting at is that it's thinking about this greatly at the church, that these young Earth Creationists are giving everyone else a bad name. The young Earth Creationists. It is 2018. And 2018, on the Greco-Roman calendar, these people who are almost the flat earthers, almost that, they seem to think from that timeline, and it was brought up in the other article, which this is a follow-up to, that the Earth should be 6 to 8,000 years old, because it says so in the Bible. To them, the literalist interpretation is relatively new, as of the Victorian era, 1900s. It's not before that. They did not have a literalist view of the Scripture. It was not literal. Even the works of John Calvin, even back to Martin Luther, was not. Martin Luther, the founder of the Protestant Church, Reformation, was not literalist. He was trying to figure out what things were going in there. Even Darwin was not a literalist either, and actually had like a basis in something. So that's interesting. But that's another can of worms, and it's probably on the other thing. The idea that somehow the Earth would be, I guess I'm going to go into that, would be less old than the mountains behind the Earth, mountains out to the side that you see on the ground. the idea that the human race is only 6,000 years old is, in 2018, is ludicrous. It's not, okay? It just isn't. Okay, there's no. The Old Testament, some parts of the Old Testament are funny. It's impossible to debate, of course, with people who are convinced, beyond the shadow of a doubt, that everything in there is literally true. No, if anything isn't true, then all of it's not true. No, that's not the case, because it's like Neil deGrasse Tyson, the scientist who is an atheist. Neil deGrasse Tyson said that eyewitness testimony is the worst kind of testimony. People writing down testimony. It's interesting how accurate some of it is. Actually, it's interesting that in the time of Solomon and King Solomon of the Israelites, he went out and he built up these monuments to the crossing of the Red Sea. Built up some monuments out there, and they found the monuments. They're out there. There's ziggurats out there marking that. They were probably built later during the Roman time and attributed to Solomon, but let's say they're Solomon. Okay, let's say they are. King Solomon did a number of other things. They were trying to find the Ark of the Covenant. They're always looking for the Ark of the Covenant, the mysterious golden box that the tablets, 10 Commandments were in. Raiders of the Lost Ark stuff. But it's in the Kings and Chronicles, says that disappeared before the Babylonian invasion, the writing on the wall and all that. You can look that up. That disappeared too with Bathsheba, his mother, and the Queen of Sheba, who sent the information away and the Ark. It's interesting that there was a alleged story about this Limba tribe in Ethiopia that had something they called an ark, and they have like a box, and they go around and they have a drum and all that, and it was on TV, it was a History Channel. It was a little sketchy, but the idea that they remembered something like that from the time of they were a lost Jewish tribe there in Limba, and that's entirely possible. That long ago it was basically made of gold and cypress wood. It's gone. It probably disintegrated ages ago. But oh well, let's keep looking for that and the Holy Grail while we're at it. I'm not going to go into the Holy Grail, but that's silly too. The Holy Bloodline thing was a silly modern thing made up by a guy, postmodern, I guess. A guy in the early 1900s, I think, named Pinard, who was French, who wanted to be royalty. So he decided, I'm going to be royalty. So I'm going to go into the French Museum, and I'm going to mess with their archives in the library, and I'm going to put my own name in the history books as a descendant of Mary herself. Yeah, so that's what he did. And they built up this big elaborate conspiracy, became Holy Blood, Holy Grail later on, and then became the Dan Brown books. No relation. Different guy. The whole thing, yeah. So that's where that came from. I'm not going to go there. That's another subject. It's not biblical. Let's go back to the Bible. So that's made up by some guy in the early 1900s who on his deathbed said, "Yeah, I made it up." So he made it up. So there's no Holy Blood, Holy Grail thing. That's silly. That's something modern. Then we go back to other things that are modern. Actually, the Old and New Testament are from 300 AD, but we'll take them at the word that they didn't change anything. No. There are lost books of the Apocrypha, though, and you can read them. They're interesting. Some of them are messed up. Some of them aren't so messed up. But yeah, even the Catholic Bible does not include some of the books, and doesn't include mention of Jesus' half-brothers, even though Jesus' half-brother wrote one of the books of the New Testament, James. Yeah. So yeah, there's a lot of that stuff. But yeah, if you take it literally. But don't take it literally. Just take it figuratively, because it is a belief system, and it's not really quantifiable logically. tends to be irrational, tends toward chaos. So what I wanted to get at was that the there is this irrational need for humanity to feel like it's important, the center of attention and everything, and the center of even the entire universe. And humanity is but a speck of stardust, as they would say, as Carl Sagan would say. Years ago. Many years ago. Oh, it's a legend now. It's over 30 years ago. The idea that one group, so to speak, one group of tribes of people in Mesopotamia in post the Sumerian time period, this one group is sectioned off by the gods to be, is remarkable that it would be them and no one else. And yeah, it's interesting. But yeah, that's what they believe. They believe that the Yahweh is the God, and then from there, Yahweh is also the New Testament God. So, okay, that's where that comes from. And then they try to add these dating systems, and try to figure out dating as in dating systems. Try to figure out how long ago all that stuff actually occurred. Putting science into their belief as though they can try to figure out where things actually happened. That's an odd thing that they're doing there. I'm not sure how they would do that. Science. We shouldn't discount science, because science and archaeology has figured out some of your holy biblical sites. We've got those pillars, Solomon's pillars. We've got that on the edge of the Red Sea. There's 3 little sites they believe was where that happened. You have some scientists thinking it was the Reed Sea, which a swamp is not as exciting, so why not the Red Sea? The Reed Sea is a little bit further up the Nile. But that's not as exciting, so the Red Sea. And then we have, the dating system that the new Earth Creationists are using to figure things out is heresy, because they're adding that stuff there. The pieces of the historical pieces of where these things happened are in some other logbooks. For instance, the flood myths. Other people would call them the flood myths, but they seem to be present in all river cultures and all waterway cultures, because people built near the water. The flood myths, Noah's Ark. There was a guy that, Bill Nye the Science Guy. He said, well, if they built a 500-foot-long ship and put it out on the water for 40 days, it would sink immediately. It would sink eventually. And also there wouldn't be enough mass on the ship to carry the 150,000 species of animal pairs on the Earth at that time for that flood myth to have actually taken place. The only way that even possibly could have worked is Pangea during the Paleolithic, which is, then all the continents would be together. That was millions and millions of years ago. So no, it wasn't that. The prevailing theory, there was a prevailing theory, unit theory, not the theory of the church, just a theory. The prevailing theory is that it was a local flooding, that comets strike, or just maybe rains or monsoons or whatever. It might have not even been something supernatural. That have just been lots of rains. Caused a lot of flooding along that Mesopotamian area, and a lot of people built boats, including Noah, and that he took his local animals from his village, put them on the boat, and went sailing around until the rain stopped. That's not as dramatic. It's not as exciting. It's entirely possible. It's not impossible. It's entirely possible. He totally could have built this big ship and put his people on. it's interesting that the Sumerians, not the Samaritans, there was a Sumerian-Samaritan confusion. Sumerians are later, 2,000 years ago. Sumerians were the one of the oldest races that developed language in the Mesopotamian area. There may have been language elsewhere, but in the Mesopotamian area, that's Eurasia, Africa, and little Mediterranean area, and just beyond that to Egypt and Israel, Palestine, and all that, Iraq and Syria, the proto version of the Hebrews, according to even archaeology, from what I've been able to gather. The proto, the Sumerians were the sort of like the proto. Well, they were proto Iraqis. I guess they were proto Babylonians technically. But they may have been taken over by others later, thousands of years later. The Sumerians existed roughly 4,000 BC or so. They had the first written languages on tablets that we know about, that at least that survived. They were interestingly enough contemporary to the Egyptians. Although the Egyptians, some of their stuff seems to go back further, which is interesting. Some of their hieroglyph stuff and their most ancient of their buildings and pyramids and temples goes back to 8,000 years ago, 6,000 BC, predating the alleged flood of Noah by a good 2,000 years. Which, interestingly enough, would be consistent with the book of Genesis. Interestingly enough, it would fit if you wanted to date it, which would be wrong. Which they shouldn't do either, because it's, yeah. If you wanted to say that as a unified theory, you could say, okay, well, we have 8,000 years ago, 6,000 BC, we have Proto-Egypt, and then we got Samaria 2,000 years later. And these guys develop picture writing and ways to tell stories orally. These guys 2,000 years later develop language, the first languages, in that region. We don't know about China. They're not mentioned. China probably had its own thing. That means there were other people elsewhere over the mountain ranges, and they were there, and they had nothing to do with Mesopotamia at all. They hadn't met. So, yeah, how does that work? And Africa, down in Africa, different people had met. And also different people in the Americas before us, before the white. We showed up later, much later, in the colonial times. That was different. So why is this one group of start out with the children of they got Isaac and Jacob and Ishmael, who became Israel. You've got the two brothers, Jacob and the ankle grabber. One of the brothers is banished out of the city and becomes the wandering tribes and nomads, some of which their descendants become the Arabs, but not all of them, just some of them. The other group, the wandering tribes, become the Amalekites and the Ammonites and the Israelites. So there you got them. Yet they're chosen for. I'm not going to say whether that's, not. It's in the book. Chosen. Okay, they're chosen. Yeah. So the Israelites, and it isn't until the New Testament that Gentiles, such as us here in America, Gentiles, are considered part of the chosen as well. Not until the New Testament, and even Samaritans, which come later, and then we came after that, much later. There it is, much later. We're supposed to be chosen in America too. I don't know how that works. I don't think so. But yeah. Okay, we're chosen. Whatever. It's not rational. It's not supposed to make sense. It's irrational. It's belief in something. I guess you got to believe in something. Otherwise, all is meaningless, like in Job. But all is not meaningless. Interestingly enough, some of these sites are still there. I mean, the Egyptian pyramids are still there. Interestingly enough, the famous city of Nineveh, mentioned in the Old Testament, as the city that Jonah and the big fish, and that story where he went in the fish and the fish spat him up on land, and he's going to go to Nineveh and convert them. Well, it still exists today. There's Nineveh. It's still there. It's one of the. It's a, I guess, Babylonian city in Iraq, and it's one of the cities, and they're yeah, I think it's Sunnis or something. I don't know, one of those groups. But yeah, they still exist. Egypt still exists. Israel still exists because we brought it back in 1940 or 7 or something. But yeah, yeah, I'm not going to go into modern Palestinian politics or anything like that. I'm just going to say that it's still there. The country's still there. So, yeah. But yeah, the idea that this whole thing is like the flat earthers, the Earth Creationists, it's like no. You just look at, like, even like Neil deGrasse Tyson explained, like, you look out into the stars and you see the Orion Nebula or the Crab Nebula. You should look for the Crab Nebula instead. The Crab Nebula is 6,000 light years away. If the Earth was only 6,000 light years old, then we couldn't see it. Actually, I can go even closer to home and say, on a mountain range, over here, the Diablo mountain range, the edge of it, and the foothills. And you could say, like, well, the Devil Mountain Range. Yep, the Diablo. And yeah, those mountains are older than us. They're older than humanity. They were formed millions of years ago. So that proves there's the rock. Go and analyze it. Indeed. Yeah. But yeah, so still humanity could be special in some way. Sure. But to take everything literally and then say all of you guys are wrong because we didn't take it literally is kind of silly. It's ridiculous. Irrational. Don't take it literally. The Old Testament has a bunch of stuff that does not make sense. Like a ship that's, that could not have, unless it was a space vessel of some kind, and ancient aliens. I think it's really weird. Or unless you say Eden was actually in the Dead Sea and it's now underground and sediment and water and it's gone. Unless you say that was actually racial memories of a tribe that existed at the end of the Ice Age, and that they just forgot the glaciers covered it. That'd be cool. Sounds dramatic. So it's gone, or maybe volcanic took it over. The gods did it. No, the god did it. The god Yahweh. He got mad. So yeah. Lenten season. Let's make the rip the young Earth people. But yeah, it's just yeah. The other stuff's fine. It's like okay. Yeah, there's Solomon stuff. They don't need to prove themselves is the thing. They don't need to prove that the first book of Genesis happened. They don't need to prove that. That doesn't make it any less true or any more true. They don't need to prove, it says in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth and the word. And then in his word with God, in the book of John, it says the word is with God, and God created the word, and the word was with God. One theory is that when John talks about that in that book, that's one of the New Testament books, he's talking about written language. He's writing down the written language. The word is literally, we learned how to speak the written language and print it. And now that would be an interesting theory, actually, because if that was the case, then he's actually writing about how the ancient proto-Israelites, Sumerians, learned how to have language. And it's interesting is there's also the Tower of Babel, where they all came together to do a tower, and it fell down because God changed their languages. But that sounds more like effect preceding cause and doesn't make rational sense. Probably really happened, as a guess, theory, it's still a theory, is that there was a big construction project going on. They were building this building, and many people came from places that did not speak the language, and they couldn't help. That is a more reasonable explanation. for that story. They just couldn't help, so they couldn't finish it because they were like, I can't talk to you. You're talking a different language than I do. And then it just fell apart. Like often civic project to do. The old even today. There's a lot of lessons from even today. So yeah, it's not. You don't need to. Don't try to figure out when Genesis started, because as far as the unified theory is concerned, Genesis technically would have started in Sumer and 6,000 years ago when they developed language. Started to write it down, written language that is, but for them in Mesopotamia, which is currently Iraq, actually, which they uncovered when those ISIL guys were blowing up stuff. They uncovered some of that stuff in addition to that. Incidentally, the Ninevites, current Ninevites, don't like those guys. But yeah, I don't know any, but I'm just heard it in the news anyway. So yeah, that's my little sequel thing, Lenten sequel thing. Yeah, I just wanted to talk about that because it was interesting that the idea that the Earth could be like ridiculously young is silly. Why not just accept that it's a metaphor for something, that it's a story that was told orally, as it was, and written down, and they had to explain the world they lived in. Remember, the world they lived in at that point was wandering nomadic tribes that barely had cities with walls. And they're wandering around the desert, wilderness, sometimes in the forests, and they had to figure out how things worked. They didn't have spaceships or satellites, cell phones, or anything like that. I mean, there was a group of almost 1 million of them who were indentured workers to the Egyptians during the time of a guy named Moses. And these indentured worker servants, they called themselves slaves. They were like, well, we want to leave, so they did that. and so 1 million of them, because you don't just count the 50,000, the 40,000, 400,000 men, but rather the 400,000 women and children as well. And so that makes about 1 million. 1 million of them wandering the desert on a trip that is about 3,000 miles from here to New York, roughly, I guess. Maybe a little less. Maybe Chicago. Maybe Chicago. They're over mountain ranges, too, so there's a mountain range that's like that. And it takes them 40 years to get to the Promised Land. It takes them 40 years to get to Israel, even though it's a 3,000-mile journey. So you got to wonder, why did it take... I mean, really, it shouldn't have taken them that long. Some of them should have already been there. But maybe some of them were the Canaanites, possibly, in the land earlier. Yeah, how come the Canaanites were in the land, and yet they were saying they were the first ones there? How the Canaanites were there? Who were they descended from? Cain? Maybe? Is it Cain? No, that's a different guy. It's not Cain. So who yeah, so there's some contradictions there that the atheist people will be confused about. They'd be like, how does that work? What's this group over here doing this other thing? Yeah, that's kind of odd. I can't answer that one. I don't know. I guess you don't quantify belief. But I think the point was that, we know too much in this day and age to accept bizarre sort of, because we're no longer in an agrarian society. We're in the age of information, the age of the computer, the information, and civilizations have come and gone, but they haven't gotten to our level before. There was no Atlantis. That was all an elaborate story. You can kind of tell there was none of that other stuff going on. But it's interesting that a lot of the stuff in the scripture does line up. There are ancient buildings and things left over. Israel's been taken down and rebuilt several times, and they've found artifacts everywhere. So they know pretty much where everything went, and some of that stuff lines up. They found Jericho 5 years ago or something. It found the actual town. It had Jericho written on something, in stone, I guess. They weren't completely Stone Age, though. And there was this funny, odd thing in this one group where I won't say who, but the odd thing, the Sunday school teacher was thinking that they wouldn't have had used fishing poles and fishing line back then. They would have used nets, but they still use. Pointed out they still use nets. They use nets in fishing. The fishing pole just would take too long. And yes, they had fishing poles in ancient times. They had, as soon as mankind could figure out how to put a string and put a little hook on it, they were out there fishing. They just didn't have a sophisticated pole. They had like a, reed or something, or plumb line on the end of it. So they were fishing in ancient times. Yeah. And the shellfish story, before I close this long thing, the shellfish story was there was a good reason for them not eating shellfish back then, during the time of these wandering tribes. Shellfish would have been poisonous to them because it had lots of bacteria and stuff in it, and it could be contaminated. Yeah, so until they figured out how to cook stuff, with fire, they soon did. They couldn't really prepare the shellfish properly. I'm sure they encountered sea cultures that, since they weren't a sea culture, they were a desert culture. They didn't know, the sea people did. They probably knew. Oh yeah, you take the shellfish and you cook it, and then you can eat it. You break it open and cook it, and you can eat it. Clams, smash them and put them, cook them. It's probably what they smashed them with a rock or something. The sea people were a group of people that invaded the Egyptians a long time ago. I think before Moses. So yeah, how does that work? That he was, Elsa the Kings and the Chronicles, all this other stuff. Yeah, so yeah, the unified theory. This is other people's theories too. It's not mine. About all that stuff is they have to in 2018 they have to establish, look, this stuff is not, it's not, come on. Yeah. So that's my little rant story there. They can still have the other stuff, it's fine. Just that a lot of the Old Testament didn't actually happen the way they said it did, because there's no way to prove it anyway. And sure, Genesis, it still could be in Genesis when they say those Sumerian tablets and things and the ancient Sumerians. That's in Genesis. It's in there. Just go back to the part in the beginning where they're hanging out, and they have the early groups that are probably the early proto-Israelites would have been related to the Sumerians in some way. There weren't that many of them at that point. The tribes born of the other group. So sure, they're probably related. They were all Mesopotamian tribes and stuff. If you went back in time, they wouldn't even be the same. Well, it'd be a different dimension if they did that, so that wouldn't work. So humanity should not nitpick over the details. It just happened, okay? Yes. And although we are a speck of star stuff, I like the premise, and we can go on later in some other story about that. I like the premise that why are they guessing that God would only choose humanity, and that like one of those what's called the Fermi paradox. One of the laws of the Fermi paradox, it's a paradox. It's a space thing, science physics thing. That's another thing they get messed up with, the theory and structure, and they could go on about that too. In a nutshell, a theory in a scientific thing is a testable hypothesis, where you can do like a test in the lab and check it over and over again to see whether it works, basically. A theory in journalism or in theology or in some other kind of science or art or a humanities thing, those kind of theories aren't a theory. That's established opinion. So that's a little different. It's established opinion. You can't really prove that. It's an established opinion. these people are right because they said this. These people are wrong because they said this. That's different. That's different. Different kind of theory. So if you're going to say, oh, this theory is wrong, well, you just probably don't understand it. Anyway, so the Fermi paradox is a theory, a mathematical theory, that about extraterrestrial life. Not going to go into ancient aliens, but in a nutshell, it's whether we are alone in the universe, whether we're not alone, and why, whether we're sort of, whether there are many worlds or not many worlds, whether there are, how many worlds there would be, how many habitable worlds there would be, and whether civilizations could develop or not. And the spin-off of that is the Kardashev rules of civilization, whereas we are approaching type 1. If we don't destroy ourselves, we will reach type 1, which is a control of our solar system, planet, and adjoining area in the next 200 years. And then we'll see. Type 2 is control of many star systems, able to go out into space, explore the galaxy, have hyperdrive, can go out and explore space. Type 3 is super advanced, control of the whole galaxy, not just a few stars, not just a few Dyson spheres and really heavy things like that. I'll look that up later. And type 4 is an off category, would essentially be, as Arthur C. Clarke once speculated, indistinguishable from magic or from gods. They would be so advanced, they would seem as gods. They would be that advanced, they would control a universal constant and could do anything they want to. So, yeah. Mind blown. Okay. So, yeah, that's kind of in a nutshell. Very basic. Go look it up. I don't know all that things about physics that much. I just know a little basic. Kind of sounded like old Dr. Gene Scott here. Scary. This is an old preacher from years ago on the TV. Yeah, so theory has it, at least my little theory has it, my little heresy has it, that we aren't alone in the universe. That it does not make sense that we're alone in the universe. So I would solve the Drake equation and the Fermi paradox. The Drake equation being the solar many worlds. Are there no worlds, many worlds? Does society destroy itself? Does it keep going? What happens? And I would say that we are not alone. That I tend to agree with some of the tenets of the science fiction shows like Star Trek, because I'm a Star Trek fan, but also because it makes sense. If our society is not type 1 level, we haven't discovered warp drive or hyperspace yet, we are probably off limits to the other aliens around, and they probably just say, oh, primitive planet, we don't want to go there because they're not at our level yet. Once they do, then we'll make contact. So like radio signals and whatever that they're picking up and whatever, they're primitive warlike culture. We don't want to make contact with them. And if you're that advanced, if you're a type 1 and then beyond, a type 2, you wouldn't be invading planets like Earth at all because you'd have all the resources you need. You wouldn't need to. There'd be no reason to unless you were just space jerks. So yeah, so the aliens are out there. They're coming. There might even be among us. Who knows? And yeah, we are not entirely a special, unique thing. The only way that works is if a proto-civilization before us was taken into space, like in my science fiction book, and lived among the aliens and was bred out in space and comes back here to Earth to visit us. Something like that could happen because that would make sense. And yeah, so it'd be unlike War of the Worlds where they would catch the diseases from Earth and die. They wouldn't because they already know everything about Earth. They've been here. So they're just like, well, here's your inoculations. Go down to the planet. Visit humans. But yes, we can't be alone in the universe. That almost second guesses God. I think I've said that in the other video. That almost second guesses God. That makes it sound like God is not creative enough to create a million other worlds just like it. Or completely different. Why would they second guess God? He can do anything he wants. He's God. He can make society an ancient group of aliens that's beyond what we could even fathom. I liked that one story, and going on a tangent a little bit, but I'm almost done. I know that one story about the alien where that 3% that was Neil deGrasse Tyson said that 3% that separates mankind from chimps, and we're not directly related to chimps. We're just genetically related to chimps. Yeah. So we're primates. That's just the way they classify things, right? We're primates. That 3% that separates us from being like chimps, which can have the mental capacity of a 3-year-old. What if an alien species had that 3% beyond us? They would be like, their 3-year-olds would be like, astrophysics, I know that, But yes, so there you go. So that's probably what it's like. That they're probably out there. We're probably like a zoo, or instead of the universe, and they're just observing us to wait for the time, the event that they come around, and there'll probably be some complaining old Earthers that'll be like, "No, the young Earthers," and the aliens will be like, "Well, we're not going to talk to those guys. We're going to talk to the nerdy people that know stuff about science and stuff." They're only more interesting to talk to. Whenever they show up, or soon when they show up. Yeah. So there's aliens. So I want to talk about aliens later. But aliens. Why not talk about aliens?